Hi, Freddie. Good to see you again.
Hey, Mike Phibbs, how are you doing?
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Dadsplaining Politics. We've got an interesting show for you today. We're going to cover, first of all, what's happening in Gaza, the latest changes there, somewhat positive. France's recognition of Palestine and some other countries considering that. Then we'll talk about the recently inked US-Europe trade deal. And then finally, we'll go through some of the latest developments on climate and some of the legal challenges to fossil fuel producers like Australia. And then finally, we'll look at the UK-Australia defence deal, which is sort of part of AUKUS, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So, Freddie, would you like to start off?
Yeah, for sure. Well, right, let me just get up my notes. Okay, yeah, so today we're gonna start talking about Gaza first of all, and talk about France's recognition of Palestine as an independent state, which is a massive thing to have happened because it's the first of any G7 nation and of any really large economic power to do so. I think so far 147 countries have recognized Palestine, and now France, I think, is the 148th country, which is a massive step. You really begin to think, once a country like France has recognized Palestine, what are we doing? Because you think about the rest of the G7 countries, Germany has a history with the Jews that they are very obviously, understandably, very fragile about, and trying to navigate this position of trying not to be against Israel, but also understanding what's happening in Gaza. So they're very hesitant, right, to recognize Palestine as a state. Okay, accept that, move on. Canada, maybe you could say, is slightly less invested at the moment. They've got a lot going on with the US, so that's kind of a reason for them not doing it. There's a reasons for like a few different countries, even the UK, they've got a lot going on and they have a very strong history with Israel. But then you look to Australia and you think, we don't have a very long history with Israel. We're an incredibly multicultural country, one of the most multicultural countries in the world, you would say, that has progressed successfully in that area. And then we have our current party in power as the Labour Party. And in their own conferences, they have voted a number of times to recognise Palestine as a state. And so the Labour Party believes in that. But yet our government is still not recognising them. And you think, why? Are they trying to do what the Australian people want them to do? Why aren't they sticking to their own beliefs? Because we voted for them.
It's a
And
good question.
yeah, sorry, you go.
It's a good question. Albo said that he doesn't want it just to be a soundbite. He wants there to be logic and actions behind it. But, symbolically, I agree with you. I think it's probably time to do this. And it would be good to get in behind France and then, of course, work on the action plan required to do that. But that's going to be a long time getting from where we are today to that scenario. So I think symbolically, I think you're right. And I think Australia's in a good position to do it. And I think this is a real test of Albo and how brave he's going to be, or whether he's just poll-driven the whole time. Because if you're poll-driven, you'd worry that some people traditionally on the conservative side always are sort of pro-Israel versus Palestine. So it'll be interesting, Freddie, to see where they end up.
It will be interesting. And I think what you're saying about being poll-driven, that's another fact that I wanted to make, right? That's another reason why the UK may be tentative to make such a choice. Because obviously Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister in the UK, has been facing like incredibly terrible popularity ratings since he has entered office, whereas Albo, won one of the best electoral results in history for the Labour Party, and yet even with that result, he's not confident to push ahead on something that he believes in, even as last week he called what Israel is doing in Gaza a breach of international law and a breach of humanity. He's still not able to recognise Palestine as a state. What is the gap there? And yeah, I think I do agree with you. This is a test of him and whether he's capable of, being someone who will be remembered in history. This is a real test of his capability as a leader.
And so that will be interesting. And then, of course, there's been airdrops of some food and supplies and supposedly some safe corridors opened up because, I think this is at a real tipping point for Israel in terms of world opinion.
But I don't really think any safe corridors have realistically been
Is that
opened
right?
up.
Okay.
No. Like we've seen across the world over the past week, what has been going on in Gaza, finally it's been splashed on the front pages of every newspaper. like further right-leaning newspapers, and you've seen how many children are starving. I think there's in the next week, there's meant to be countless thousands of children who will die of starvation. That's been predicted just due to the lack of
And
food.
it is curious, though, why there can't be a ceasefire. What do you put this supposed talk of Hamas not agreeing to things? Because, I mean, what do you think's behind that, etc.?
I mean, look, I would also say again, Hamas is a terrorist organization, but if we're talking about ceasefire agreements, we've seen a number of ceasefire agreements almost come to fruition, and Hamas making some concessions, but Israel is unable to make any concessions. And I think that that's important to note. We need to place more pressure on them because Israel has, extraordinarily high expectations for Hamas. I know that Emmanuel Macron, in his statement when he recognized Palestine as an independent state, he made some requirements. I have them. Okay, the requirements were that there is an immediate ceasefire. This is a requirements for protecting Palestine as a state. Immediate ceasefire, immediate release of all Israeli hostages, a massive surge of humanitarian aid into Gaza, and the demilitarization of Hamas. And I think it really has gotten to the point where surely the leadership in Hamas would begin to make some concessions. But then, arguably, I think the rest of the leadership of Hamas is no longer in Gaza or in Palestine. They're in other countries. They're in Qatar, I've heard, even some in Syria. So how are they feeling the pain that the people in Gaza are feeling?
It's the epitome of evil, though. The people they're meant to be representing, right? They have a part in them starving to death, right? I mean, this is just
I suppose, but I also think that at this point, they're not representing the people. They are just a terrorist organization just fighting for what they believe in. The people are not choosing them at this point to represent them. Yes, they have been democratically elected in the past, but I don't think nearly anyone in Gaza at the moment wants this war to keep going. I think they want it to end, and they would be willing to demilitarize Hamas if they got a real promise to that. I mean, that's just a hypothesis, but I strongly believe it.
terrible. It's a terrible situation. You're not sure where it's going to end. So hopefully something positive comes out in the
Yeah, for
next
sure.
few weeks or so. Shall we move on?
Yeah, let's move on because we've got a lot to talk about today. I think we've got quite a session.
Europe at the last minute because new tariffs were meant to be going on, 25% on August 1st. Trump is in Scotland at one of his golf courses, inaugurating a new golf course there. And it was amusing that I was hearing that from the 18th hole, he can see a wind farm and he thinks wind farms are terribly ugly and la la la. So that's going to be interesting for his discussion with Keir Starmer, I think tomorrow or something, because it's all part of Britain's climate change strategy, which is good. And then I think this is a continuing saga of trying to take attention away from the Epstein drama for Trump. So supposedly last minute, he asked von der Leyen to come to Scotland and they agreed the deal. That deal is 15% tariff on all European exports to the US. Europe buying a whole lot of gas from the US, which of course they need, right, given they can't get it from Russia anymore, which makes sense. And a whole lot of arms, etc., which also makes sense in the regard of the Ukraine side of things. I've read some analysis of this to say that this is Europe capitulating with the US, and in fact, this is going to be incredibly damaging to Germany and the exporters, etc. But it's interesting, von der Leyen has a difficult part to play here, right? Because she can sort of give this as a win, 15% versus what would have been 25%. And a huge trade war.
30%, actually.
Could have been huge trade war.
No, it was going to be 30%.
So what do you think about that, Freddie? What do you think of her negotiating?
Oh God, I don't know. I mean, I think Ursula von der Leyen is it's quite a divisive character. I mean, there's been many times where a lot of Europeans haven't been proud to have her as the leader of the European Council. So she's a bit further right wing, I think, than most people would expect her to be, but obviously she's very proud of the European Union itself, so that leans her in the other direction. Look, I don't know what I would do in this situation. I think that it's really a step backwards that the EU is deciding to fund like natural gas and pour billions of dollars, or millions at least, into natural gas from the
They
US.
have to, darling, because there won't be any heating in Europe in the winter unless they do that. You see, they've got nuclear, quite a lot of nuclear, and they're going all out on renewables, but they also need baseload power for the next few years, right?
Okay, I understand that, but what we're going to talk about next is climate change, and I really think we've gotten to a very dangerous point, and so I think my politics has changed a bit in the last few weeks just reading about everything that's going on with climate change. So I think maybe a few weeks ago I would have understood this, but I think that now I'm a bit more pessimistic and existentialist, I would say.
But it's, Freddie, I get it, but you're thinking longer term,
I don't
whereas,
think it's that long term.
okay, but you're thinking next few years, whereas they're thinking this winter, will we have enough fuel to heat Europe? That's what they're thinking, right? They're
I
not even
know, I
thinking
know
long.
that's what they're thinking, but they were fine last year without this.
No, no, they had to import a huge amount of
From
gas
where?
from around the world, even
Why couldn't
Australia.
they keep doing it around the world? Again, they
Well,
do
because
need
they had
to
to
bend and
come
do
up
it.
with this deal, and the US may as well get it from the US rather than elsewhere and agree a deal. But the weird thing is, UK came away with just a 10% tariff versus the European Union with 15%, which is a bit bizarre, right? Given the size of the European Union, these are the two biggest economies in the world. And in a way, I feel a little disappointed in von der Leyen for not negotiating a better deal. But I don't know all the background stuff, and a deal is better than no deal, I
I mean,
suppose.
I think she's done an incredible job. I think Trump was very negative towards the European Union and has been. It's everything that he doesn't believe in. It's everything that he hates. It's a union of countries working together. There's no Germany first policy in sight in Deutschland at the moment, right? Like, it's everything he hates. And to give a union of everything he hates only 15% tariffs when he's giving other countries much higher, I actually think is quite a win. And
That's
I
true.
don't think he could
Okay,
have
good.
they could have like argued for a better deal because he likes the UK a lot more. He just does.
Yeah, yeah.
He has the connection with the monarchy, like we've talked before. He has way more
And his
respect
grandmother
for
was
it as a
Scottish.
country. Yeah, so I just think that would have been far easier for Keir Starmer to negotiate. He could have maybe even gotten a better deal. Let's be tough on him. Everyone in the UK is being tough on him, so we can too.
Anyway, it'll be very interesting how European companies respond and how much investment they therefore do in the US. This is a huge win in a sense for Trump because 15% of European exports, a huge amount of money for the US. He will count this as a big win and it diverts attention from Epstein's.
It does. A lot has been diverting attention from
Yes.
Epstein. Actually, one more thing I would say, just to mention on Trump and tariffs and diverting attention from Epstein. I'm not sure if you've seen all the stuff that's been going on with Paramount recently, because Paramount, this is quite relevant to everyone listening. You should be interested by this, and I'm sure that most of you have heard of it as well. Paramount, they were. Trump started targeting them for something, and they were worried about him targeting them in return. And so they basically paid him out this massive amount in order to settle the argument, let's call it. And recently, Stephen Colbert has had his show cancelled because in response to Paramount with this big settlement, he said he was shocked and disappointed in Paramount for doing that with Trump because obviously he's not a supporter of Trump. Now he's had his show cancelled over the past few days. In the last few days of his show, he's had many guests on talking about how disgusting Paramount is and how it's, complete betrayal of the industry and everyone within it. And there's been multiple sketches on different TV shows, and it's really reflecting how the media is not going to fall in line with Trump. No matter how much influence he has and no matter how much power he has, the propaganda he wants to put out into the world isn't being completely successful. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah, it's super interesting, isn't it? Shall we move on to climate change? You want to kick us off?
Yes. Yeah, I can start on this. So obviously the International Court of Justice is the world's highest court system. It's international law, so it relies on people doing what they're told without, definite repercussions for not doing it. So it basically just relies on people being good. And the International Court of Justice recently made a ruling saying that countries can be held responsible for climate change, which has huge repercussions as a precedent because until this current moment, climate refugees weren't recognized in international law and they still aren't. But the fact that countries can be held accountable for climate change means that it's paving a way for climate refugees to be recognized. And going into the next few years, we've already seen hundreds of thousands of climate refugees around the world. We will see more and more and more. And the direction we're heading in is that there'll be millions of people traversing the world in order to escape rising water levels, droughts, hurricanes, like a number of natural disasters. So hopefully this will make a difference, and we'll see this court ruling impacting places like Australia, where obviously we have massive fossil fuel exports, if you want to continue on that.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating how that plays out. Obviously, big fossil fuel producers like Australia, that's the next angle of this, not just your domestic consumption and what you're doing, but what is the impact of your exports? People are using that around the world. I think this is going to play out long term. More domestically, of course, the coalition is all a mess again about this because you've got Barnaby Joyce, etc., saying they don't agree with net zero, and it's sort of boring going back to the future sort of thing scenario, and you've got to feel bad for Susan Lee trying to pull all this together.
I mean, you really do. I've been reading a lot about that in the past few days. She's trying to branch a new way forward for the Liberal Party, but yet no one's listening to things that she has to say. She's saying that it's all right for there to be acknowledgement of country. She's saying it's all right for there to be net zero and it's realistic because she knows that that's what the average Australian wants, right? The average Australian voted for Albo's government, and that government is representative of change for climate policy, representation of Indigenous people. So she understands that, but these right-wing politicians are unable to get their heads into it, their heads out of their asses. So we'll see what happens with that. And I think it's quite interesting as well because recently the Torres Strait had, I think it was the Torres Strait, they had a climate change ruling saying that, because they tried to say that Australia had a responsibility to look after them, considering Australia has such a massive carbon footprint, and because they're so close by that they have a responsibility. But the Australian court overruled it and said that they didn't have any responsibility to the people. But this ICJ court ruling could then have implications that cases like this one that just went through could potentially be overturned in the future, and that we do have a responsibility to protecting like smaller nations in, our closer region.
It'll be fascinating to see how that plays out. And then finally, we had all the UK Defence Minister and leadership out here talking about Australia and UK partnership regarding that section of AUKUS and, a 50-year agreement and supposedly 7,000 jobs this is going to create in Australia. The biggest announcement, the Defence Minister said, Richard Marles, since, the establishment of the Australian Navy, etc. So interesting that this was all done prior to the US review of AUKUS coming out. And it's clear that it's much easier doing business with the UK for Australia and vice versa for the UK with us than trying to predict what the US will do. I still think this is somewhat of a smokescreen because, if the US doesn't, guarantee those subs, and if they keep talking about sovereignty of the subs and us committing to a war versus China, etc., etc. I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but I'm still fascinated how Albo handles this. He's got a lot on his plate, right, in terms of dealing with these various issues.
I know foreign policy really feels like it's at the forefront of everything, and when that's not a very electorally beneficial policy path, right, people don't typically vote on what's happening in foreign policy. It must be fascinating to be him, having to spend so much time on it, knowing that people aren't necessarily going to be proud of him or thankful to his work in that area.
But I do think there's an opportunity for him again to be brave, because I think I was reading 5 out of 6 Australians disagree with the Trump approach, by far the majority. And so I think there is a sense that Australia needs to pave its own path here. somewhat independent or a middle ground between China and the US. So that's a fascinating challenge, and it will be interesting how that plays out.
I agree, and I think that this relationship that we have with the UK is obviously one which we now want to protect. If our other closest ally has now been turned against us by whatever means, you can probably summarize that yourself. But I think it's interesting that we're putting more emphasis on this relationship. And I thought it was quite good. The UK High Commissioner to Australia, she said that the UK-Australia relationship is an anchor in a contested world. And when we're talking about UK and Australia, we know the contested world that she's talking about is the US. It's a very clear statement saying that we are not going to turn on each other's backs, even if they have. And we'll see what effect that has on, our other relationships. Yeah, like you said, with China and with the US as well, if they feel offended that we've gone not behind their backs, but we've gone and made another deal on the side that doesn't include them.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And to our listeners, we're thinking about some new guests to come on the show. If you've got any ideas, if you'd like to see, let us know. Again, we're really desperate for some of your questions, etc. We know you like this podcast, but we'd love to get your questions. And please keep promoting it with your friends, and like and follow us and subscribe on YouTube. And that would be great. Freddie, lovely chatting with you.
Lovely to chat to you as well. Thanks, guys, for listening. We love you. Join us next week.
Bye.
Bye.